Good evening. Good evening, sir.
May God protect us. May He guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and happiness us all. Yeah, let's see. Of course, this is Good Friday, and in this time of quarantine and so forth, and services, and it's a good time to remember that miss external symbols, social aspects of ceremony and so forth, will go part of the house to the heart. So this is in a sense a good way to force us to go into the inside and experience our special holy days in a very deep and personal way. So, Swami, I think you have some things that you wanted to...
No,
look
they'll
at.
just come up
They'll
in the
come up
course,
as it...
yeah.
All right. So we're working with the complete works of Swami Abhedananda, and we're just finishing up his lecture on the states of existence that was given about 1920. And so we're just got a few pages left, and if time permits, we'll be starting a new chapter on our relationship to the Absolute.
And Swami, tell me one more time to whom these words were addressed.
It seems to be that they were given to a rather august group of scholars and people that were especially interested in psychology or metaphysics and psychology and philosophy and so forth.
And what did he do in July?
All right, so page 572, if you're following along, which volume this is it? This is 3, volume 3. The advanced lesson in the psychology will lead us to the highest realization of our true being, and not only of our true being, but also of the reality of the universe. It will lead us to the knowledge of truth. The realization of truth will come to us when we have transcended these three states, meaning referring to the waking state, the dream state, and the dreamless, sleepless state. There is a fourth state of existence, which is known as the transcendental or Turiya. It is very difficult to understand this transcending fourth principle. It is like the third, yet it is not the same. Again, there is a resemblance of the dreamless sleep with the fourth state. Then the fourth state, in which all the states, waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep states, would not appear as real. Everybody, we can get the gist. In other words, the fourth state is the state in which all these others, they would not appear as real without this fourth state. They would all appear, without the reality of the fourth state. They would all appear as dreams or delusions, which never existed. Now, that state is the state of realization. If you can once enter into that state, you will never forget that these states never existed in relation to you. And in reality, they never can exist. But they appear like a delusion, Maya. We would not have a body, wife, or children, because these are all in the realm of names, forms, and appearances, which are known as avidya, or ajnana, meaning not knowledge. So the apparent reality is on the sense plane, and the absolute or permanent reality is beyond time and space and beyond our thoughts. When we go beyond our thoughts, which are relative, There is the realm of the absolute. There we come in touch with the infinite and become one with the infinite. Oh, we really are close to the end, sorry. So these states of consciousness, when properly understood, will help us to realize our relation to the infinite, which is beyond time, space, and beyond causality. The infinite, and here he means the term infinite is used to denote the timeless and spaceless transcending principle, the absolute Brahman. The infinite is the absolute Brahman. It transcends even the fourth state, Turiya, because the categories of the different states of consciousness are also the limiting adjuncts, the upadhis. So the Brahman is absolutely raised from all kinds of state, all kinds of category, and all kinds of adjuncts. It is one and without the second. Now there was a footnote for Turiya. It says, in fact, Turiya, or the fourth state of consciousness, is not a state at all. It is called the fourth in relation to the third one. And
So-
that ends that chapter.
So Swami, this is big. Let's stay with it a while. You've said it all. I'm not saying that he reserves unto himself the whole reading,
Yeah.
but he has said it all. And it's so profound to me that I'm thinking that probably we might do well even to remember that Abhedananda, who expands on the short and simple and profound axiomatic way that Swami Vivekananda speaks of these things often, and he's written a whole book here. This is volume 3, and it's published separately as True Psychology. It's a very wonderful synthesis. And these last few pages mean so much to me that, just so you'll know, I've decided I want to Xerox them. And, like suitable for framing, you say something is so wonderfully written or something. And keep it where I can reach it, because it really is, I think, the fulfillment and summation of Vedanta. So if you don't mind, Swami, from the simplest of these, your brethren, I'd like to just go over it in my mind out loud a little and see some of the things that stand out for me. We're talking here about the superconscious state. Now, Western psychology is willing to talk about the waking state. We've decided that science, in great measure, uses the criteria, right, of the senses for what it determines it can establish about the outside world. And they'll call that truth. That is to say, science is seeking truth. I think we can say that, as is spirituality. And as far as we go along together, our founding Swami Prabhupada used to point out that, the spiritual path, the spiritual experience, in no sense contradicts reason. But it's like two friends, right, climbing a mountain. And the mountain of God, if you will, the mountain of truth. Swami says, Swamiji, imagine, he says at one mood, one audience, science and truth are all the religion there is. So it's the same quest in science and spirituality, but these two friends climbing the mountain, and maybe you could say that one morning, spirituality gets up real early before dawn, 5 o'clock, and leaves his friend, as he had so many days of climbing together and seeking together with the same criterion of validity, and that is experience. Science using sense experience. And he leaves his friend, his good friend, soundly sleeping in one of these other states, the dream state, the dreamless state, and he keeps going on up the mountain alone until, with Moses, he sees the shining face of God and his own face shines. It's in the Bible. You know how much I love that phrase, and Moses came down from the mountain and wist not that the skin of his face shone. He knew he was illumined on the inside, he just had his interview with God. All right, so they climbed to the top of the mountain. And in India they call that Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which we believe is the same experience as nirvana for the Buddhists, union with God for the Western mystics, nirvana for the Japanese. Samadhi, this way they described Sri Ramakrishna's experiences, top of the mountain experiences, union with God experiences, which then, just for entertainment, why, he decided he would try to find in each of the practicing arenas of religion that were available to him in India in his day, in Christianity and Islam, and in absolutely every one of the myriad paths he could think of in the Indian tradition, sacred tradition. And the point is that he found on top of the mountain that it's all the same. Now, some people like to think that he did that in order to establish the validity of interfaith. Holy Mother, who knew him best, as did he, she. As a matter of fact, they were the only ones that could understand each other in that depth sense. She said the reason he did it, his motivation, was to find God. This is a side effect, that's why we love interfaith and Vedanta. It's very real. It's not just an adaptability or politeness. We think that each of the great rivers of faith, each of them leads to the same goal, because Sri Ramakrishna demonstrated, again, a very scientific, if you will, thing to do. So I would like to just take a moment to think about this, because what we're hearing is that the scientist deals with the waking state for sure. It's a question whether science has delved into the realm of sleep very deeply. Frankly, Freud came up with a lot of magnificent metaphors, really, using Greek mythology, mostly. Latin words out of the Greek, probably mainly out of the Greek philosophical wisdom. He used one word out of the Sanskrit, did Freud, according to our Swami in his lectures on Sunday. He said that there are two, maybe goals is the word. Our Swami is paraphrasing Freud. One is the will to life, survival instinct, the will to life, which I think cannot be deeded to any other man, any other person, excepting in wartime there's a question to your captain. And even then there's a limit. We don't want to get too much into this, but during a recent unpleasantness that was conflicting the American people, all of our wars had two sides on them. Everybody always used to go to Canada. The Revolution, the Loyalists went to Canada. But the song that was sung by some of our more rebellious folk singers was, "We were waist deep in the big muddy river." And the fool, the second lieutenant, said to go on. But still we have this submergence of ego, which in itself has a certain glory attendant to it. Then in those circumstances, we agree, or whatever it is, to deed this most deep of human instincts, survival, to another person, the second lieutenant, second Louis. The other one, says Freud, is the will to death. He said the will to life can be overcome. But the will to death, Freud, no shipper seven is he, which he called the will to nirvana, can never be overcome. The will to something greater. The will to something beyond. Even that realm that Freud really did enter, waist deep. The life of the dream state. Of course, his disciple, he had two main disciples, but one was Adler, who thought that perhaps the will to power or the power urge is very important. And Carl Jung, who was a close friend of our Swami Akhilananda, our more recent living psychology Swami. There's Abhedananda, there's Akhilananda in Boston, an Indian Swami, and he walks, I would like to think, almost hand in hand with Carl Jung in Dolimat. And Jung comes up with the four personality types, they're the four yogas. I'd like to think that's because he knew Akhilananda. But beyond The waking state, which we've heard tonight itself is ephemeral, full of mirages we've discovered even through the sense experience in our readings on Friday night and talked about it. The waking state, and then the dream state. Now, some people feel that Freud did not have the opportunity to go deeply enough into human experience to speak with these grand metaphors and philosophies in which he spoke, borrowing from the Greek through the Latin, and in this one case from the Sanskrit. There's something called the natural history phase of what we call true science. And that's they used to say the collection of facts, the classification of facts, and the interpretation of facts is the scientific method. It's deeper than that, but there is a natural history phase in which data are pulled in from every place, and if we can't get far enough with our own eyes, we use a telescope and a microscope. But that Freud did not have a widely and a deeply enough effort, just one man, a bold pioneering attempt in the natural history phase. Be that as it may, there's another phase, the deep sleep state. We've talked about it. And interestingly enough, as I say, we have the right, not only the right, the responsibility to examine everything. In India, they speak of this state of consciousness, the deep sleep state, no dreaming, as the blissful sheath, the blissful state. How could it be blissful? You're dead in the door, you're knocked out. But yeah, I think again, William James, introspective psychology, you decide, people do say, oh, I had a wonderful sleep last night. I was dead to the world. I just don't remember a thing. I slept so deeply I didn't even remember dreaming, didn't dream. And I feel so refreshed. The sense of continuity, the sense of an awareness, of a consciousness which never ceases, is there. And they're sort of liking it to, you have your own decisions, you read these things, to lying at the feet of Brahman. I've never heard it said that way, but lying at the feet, if you will, of Brahman, in a sleep state, right next to the shining infinity which the Indians call bliss, call joy. And even though we don't remember a thing, we were that close. The fact that we get up feeling whole again, refreshed, really at one with ourself, a contented self, experiencing that peace that passeth understanding in the higher realms with the superluminary. So this is getting pretty interesting. Now what we're hearing is that all this time, with these three states, we've been approaching an awareness that's higher, super consciousness, and really deeper. So we will go ever more deeply within. That is, as it were, the root of these other three states. And that is, in its highest manifestation, the full consciousness of Brahman. So I would like to call it tonight the awareness of Brahman. The word apprehension has more than one meaning. It doesn't mean fear. It means to include everything, to assimilate, or to sense, to be aware of something bigger than we are. So the awareness, I suspect, of Brahman comes in this fourth state that they're speaking of. And my friends, it's not all that abstract or unattainable or inaccessible to the Western mind. Yeah, we're 3 blocks from Hollywood and Vine. Everybody? 3 blocks from Hollywood and Vine, and the foothills of the Hollywood Hills is an oasis of the spirit. A place where there are pools, as there were, of tranquility and peace, of Vedanta society. Well, this is getting to be kind of cool. Because I really have rarely done this, but once or twice, when I first hit town, and we've all come here, drawn by something we don't know what, a magnetism sometimes, we feel like that. I used to say to John, the real causation is a pull, not a push. The pull of the all, of the absolute, towards joy, towards existence, towards consciousness. So I came here in pretty good distress, like John the Baptist, locusts and wild honey out the desert, as it were. Because I was trying to get the living waters of experience and the academia and the great charismatic people, including Miss Lithauer in first grade that we met all of it. And I was pretty discombobulated. And I knocked on the window at Trabuco at night. They were there in the big room. And a young fellow named Phil Griggs came to the door. He's 95 in the shade now?
Something like that.
6, 7? Swami Yogeshananda, the longest living Ramakrishna sadhu. I love the guy, huh? Hope you don't mind. Got a problem here. Houston, got a problem here. Simply adore the guy. And he's a little like an artichoke, He's a marvelous, he writes wonderful books. He claims he came and opened the door for me. I only found out a few years ago. And I said to him, Swami, because we have this kid-like thing, I said, would you do it again? Like Jack Benny, your money or your life. I'm thinking. I went to the shrine. When I finally figured out that this place, Trabuco, was the place I heard of at the University of Chicago, the Divinity School, people had gone through there. Oh my goodness, it's the same place Gerald heard. I knew Gerald. I talked to him on the phone. I said, if they'll just let me meditate a half hour a day, I'll do, or I'll try to do anything they want to do. They put me in this sensory-deprived environment. It's all black. You're in this well, kind of like the planetarium in New York or something, a Hayden planetarium. And they turn out the lights, and there's nothing but, when you came in, there was a pit in the middle. You can't you fall into the middle. In those days. And as I sat there, wanting something, needing everything, and having nothing. With my eyes closed, I felt something. I'm not talking about, high states, but I'm just talking about an apprehension of something else, something more, something behind my head, which happens to have been something one of my philosophy professors, Abhedananda, I didn't know it. He says that shows we have an awareness behind just our conscious, such kind. And yes, there was something which now I might call the All with a capital A. The Father. Jesus spoke in Aramaic on this day, or a day similar to it, some 2,000 years ago or less. And he spoke like Buddha spoke in the common tongue of Pali, spoke in Aramaic. As some people feel, he was giving up his life for us. And he said, Daddy, imagine what a relationship with God. He said, Daddy, Abba. It means more than father in the common parlance of his day. It means daddy. Why hast thou forsaken me? Now, the Vedantas come at this from an entirely different space. They come in from the recent absolute climbing of the top of the mountains for Ramakrishna over and over again, and his disciples once, twice, 2 or 3 times, whatever. They say that Jesus, if he had wanted to, never indeed have felt that he was connected with the body and mind and the pain. One of Ramakrishna's disciples, remember that? He went to see him. And Ramakrishna had cancer at the end of his life, throat cancer. And he wanted to talk to this person that had come to see him and say, oh, I'm so ill, distressed, I'm hurting, I'm in pain. And the disciple will say, looked at him and say, but I don't see that. He might have said, Master, I don't see that. I see that inside you're all joy. And in modern translations, Ramakrishna turned aside and said, the rascal's got my number. So for those for whom Good Friday is very difficult, as it would be for almost anyone, I should think, Swami Prabhupada had the analogy of the coconut, which when it's green, the seed is one with the shell, and you shake it and it's one thing. But when it's ripe, the seed of the coconut is separate from the shell. And he felt that Jesus was always, in some part of his mind, separate, because he was a superluminary. I and my Father are one. So now we've got the idea here, you see, that the awareness, which is not difficult. You go into the shrine here, you go into Chartres, you go this place, that place, maybe walking in the mountaintop. Our Rene Pineda, that's why we gave him the name, got it, or felt it in a Japanese garden that the Methodist choir director had built with his bare hands right here in the Hollywood Hills. Beautiful. In one place he felt it, like a shower of joy. Oh yes, and Abhedananda, the English Swami at Trabuco, when somebody was in distress, went to him, one of the brothers, younger brother, and he said, the sweetness is real. So we've got the superconscious state, we've got the ground of being, as Paul Tillich used to say, the ground of being, which is in a way looking down on the waking and dreaming and dreamless sleep state. The real watcher, the observer, the witness, is not even the mind. Because the mind, you can speak about my mind. There is a course that some swamis select for certain of their students to sit down and think of your mind for a while. Just watch it. Let it go and watch it, and it'll settle down. So this other awareness, this deeper awareness, is what we are striving for when we speak about consciousness. And the fact is that in the Indian perception from the highest point of the mountain, consciousness and existence are one. Don't you see what the awareness is? The awareness is consciousness of being, capital B. So being and consciousness in the Indian understanding of the highest denotation, you can't define it or describe it, the highest state of oneness with God, Nirvikalpa Samadhi, they're one. Consciousness and being. And oh yes, did I forget? Swami, you're not supposed to let me do that. And oh yes, bliss, joy. That's why these crazy swamis run around loose. They're joking all the time in India. They're the funniest people on the face of the earth. I'm kind of glad that they dress in orange. Sometimes I dress in black. But I don't want to dress in black every day. And here's the last point. Atma. Atma's our Mr. Magoo. He's probably the most loving guy we got. I'll put him up as my candidate, like the dog show or something. Atma's got a great big picture. I'm talking about a supersized giant big picture in his room. Photograph. You can have yours, I can have mine. In our hearts, our chosen ideal. Man and wife in India can be different. They don't even need to know. But Atma's got this great picture in him, so there's suspicion. It's probably the role model, the inspiration that he's chosen to try to think of as a person of God vision to aspire and climb the mountain. And looks at this picture. Shh, this is strictly between you and me. All of you out there in radio land, TV land. It's a picture of Sri Ramakrishna. And Atma, my favorite person in this regard, says, he says he's so lovable. Myron, that's all you got to say. Myron tells me to go to the Parliament of Religions and tell everybody your God is my God. So I have rejoiced in this. I have never read anything by Abhedananda till now. He's got 12 volumes, stayed 20 years in America, Abhedananda. I'm proud of him, please. He, like Gutenberg, he kept printing these things out for us. And it's really meaningful. What is reality? Is there something we can call real? Or is it all slip and slide? Is it all watch the show tonight and pay your money for a ticket? And then tomorrow have to face the hard realities of life? No, they say in India, or much rather, yes. What is it about yes you don't understand? There is a reality that doesn't change. A love that's always abiding. A happiness that never ends. And oh yes, an immortality that is unchallengeable. Because the real is beyond time and space. Thank you, Swami Abhedananda ji. Thank you so much.
Well, you can really tell how he was speaking to a particular audience and bringing them from their background to the ideas of Vedanta. And you see that very clearly in these lectures. Of course, now we have a lot more information about the dream state and so forth, thanks to modern technology and all sorts of machines and sleep studies and so forth. But it's still interesting. I always find that it remains somewhat of a mystery. It's classified as one of the sleep and dreams, especially, are classified as one of the great mysteries of the human existence. And I often liken that to the difficulty we have trying to answer, why does God bother to have all this exist? What is Mahamaya doing here? Why is she putting on this great show? And so when people ask me that, I just remind them, well, we go to sleep every night and we have all these crazy dreams and we really don't know why we do that either. So there you go. It's a great analogy. And so until you reach that state of illumination, that question will remain. And of course, then they say when you reach that state, the question disappears. And that's about the best you can do.
There's a German philosopher that asks this big question. And to him, it's the big question. Why should there be anything at all? The big question is existence. Why should anything exist or nothing? And I came to the conclusion, not that I did, but the light went on, apropos of even in France, when I was at a little church in South France, beautiful, a little kind of room where there was an altar table. It wasn't like big church, but they did have the Mass there, no doubt, the Eucharist. And I finally came to a feeling that I passed by a preacher named George Hunsinger at the Department of Religions once, out of Princeton. He agreed with me, he happened to be Protestant, that this is what probably Anselm was driving at when he was trying to come up with an argument for the existence of God. It's called the ontological argument. The problem is that other people come up with other arguments, and absent experience, you just have one opinion than another. But I decided that if anything exists, then God must exist. If anything truly exists in this deep sense, then God must exist. And the thing that came to my mind, I'm not going to get in a theological thing, but you might like to see that it gave peace to one little fella that doesn't have much upstairs. I was in this place where the Eucharist is held, the Mass. And remember what Jesus said just last night. It was quite a night with his disciples. He said basically three things. He said, I want you to go and preach outside of your home. They expected he would come back in Israel, but no, he said, in their lifetime, he said, I want you to go to Europe, whatever he put it. I want you to go shine your light on the Gentiles and make of Judaism a universal, admittedly a slightly heretical brand, but of the main Abrahamic faith. He said, I want you to go shine your light on the Gentiles and make it a kind of a universal. So then he said, he did three things. One, he washed the feet of the disciples. Dusty Rhodes, there was a singer or somebody, that great name, Dusty Rhodes, R-H-O-A-D. In India, Swami Sarvadeva, when he first came, he was so pleased. He saw a movie about Jesus, Reader's Digest. Oh, it's just like India today, Bengal. You walk a long road in sandals or bare feet. And your feet are dusty when you get somebody's home. Somebody comes and washes your feet, usually a servant if they have such. Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. And then he said, a new commandment I give unto you. 11th, if you will, that you shall love one another even as I have loved you. And the third thing he did is they were having supper, just their usual bread and butter supper. He took a biscuit and broke it. Is this all right? We love all the rivers of faith. And he handed portions of it to the disciples. He didn't say, this is me. He said, I and my Father are one, because he hadn't overcome with somebody, whatever you want to say. But he said, this is my body. Broken for you. Does that mean to anyone, perhaps, that all the suffering that we've gone through, the persecutions that every faith has experienced on this earth, from the misapprehension, the dismal darkness of the human mind of people of other faith, does that mean that all of the strife for noble causes, glory, hallelujah, our God is marching on, liberty, huh? Does that mean that the pain and suffering of an invisible, tiny particle that isn't even really fully alive, can't replicate itself, called a virus, is bringing nations and potentates and the poor to their knees all around the world and creating that kind of harmony that comes to humanity when collectively it faces death? Do you know when America got down on its knees? When John F. Kennedy rode by in a caisson, and after the casket, with the American flag draped over it, passes by a horse with saddle. A riderless horse rides by. And Jean Dixon, who was some kind of other thing, psychic, said she saw John F. Kennedy. Doing an Irish jig on top of that casket, on top of that caisson as rolled by. And my friends, I know because I was there. So was Myron, so was some of us. All of America that day, at that time, got down on its knees. They did. And wept together. As Jesus said, I hope you don't mind, Gentile and Jew, male and female, bondsman and free. So then Jesus took the glass of refreshment, you know, bread and butter, country boy, and he didn't exactly pour it into each man's hand, but in effect, passed around anyway. He said, this is my body, broken for you. In moments of sorrow, realize there is peace, there is joy, there is a reason, there is some kind of way that we're one, and we feel it at these moments. As a world, we get down on our knees or forced there, whatever it is, and we no longer feel the same as we did yesterday. Some people are Russians, and some people are this, and some people are Spanish, Eskimos. This invisible little virus, which is in relation to a bacterium the size of a football to an automobile. Invisible. And we're talking about unity. We're talking about love. So I just feel that our job is to strive by holy company, by all of us who are striving together. That's what this is all about. And certainly by the company of the men who have come, leaving, as they say, hearth and home. My goodness, they're hard to find their way back home. Show me the way to go home. I'm tired and I want to go to bed. Had a little drink about an hour ago. Went right to my head. Oh, you'll always hear me singing this song. Wherever you may roam, you'll always hear me singing this song. Show me the way to go home. These men came 10,000 miles for us with an individualistic culture that can hardly put one man, his armor over the other man's shoulder and say, brother, I'll help you off the battlefield. They came for us. So I suggest that if you can find any of these Indian swamis running around loose, glom onto them. Be around them for a while. They've either dipped their own toe in the pool, or their teachers did, or their teachers didn't. Pretty soon you're back to one of the recent superluminaries and a whole bunch of disciples that just love God more than anything else in life. Reality, capital R. Beyond time and space. This thing is just so wonderful. Okay, y'all, thank you.
All right, what would you like to do? Shall we continue with the next?
Let me just do quick,
chapter?
just a couple of quotes, not many, Lord knows. Lord knows. How long, oh Lord? Not long. Not long. How long? Not long. I find this just very interesting. This is Patanjali, who wrote in the early time of our current era about these things. He said, the central act of ignorance, unknowing, is the identification of the Atman, infinity within, the shining within, where all is joy, which is consciousness itself with the mind-body, hyphen, quote, that which merely reflects consciousness. That's what Patanjali defines as egoism, the identification of the self, the big self, with the mind and the body. That's where the ego jumps into the picture. And there, everything hits the fan. Everything. Adam and Eve, that's the development of ego. They were happy animals before that. All right, at whose behest does the mind think? Asks the Kena Upanishad. Who bids the body live? Who makes the tongue speak? Who is that effulgent being that directs the eye to form and color? We've talked a lot about that the last few Fridays. And the ear to sound. The Atman, capital A, infinity within. Our real self, capital S, is the ear of the ear. Mind of the mind. Speech of the speech. It is also the breath of the breath. And eye of the eye. Having given up the false identification of the Atman with the senses and the mind, and knowing the Atman to be Brahman, infinity as the all. The wise become immortal. And I just want to touch on this because one of my friends is really dealing with it now. Western philosophy produced two schools of thought with regard to the problem of consciousness, the materialist and the idealist. The materialists, they call themselves realists. The materialists believe that consciousness is a product and a process. In other words, first comes the meat inside the cranium, the brain, and out of that somehow leaps out consciousness. That it arises when certain conditions are fulfilled and is lost when these conditions do not exist. Thus, according to the materialist philosophers, consciousness is not the property of any single substance. The idealists, on the other hand, believed, that's past tense, and were therefore faced with the conclusion that it must cease whenever the mind becomes unconscious. Modern scientists would seem inclined to reject both these hypotheses and to believe these be quantum people mainly, and to believe that consciousness is always present everywhere in the universe, even though its presence cannot always be detected by scientific methods. In this approach, they approach the viewpoint of Vedanta. Now, just give me one other tiny little time here. Here's Patanjali writing from ancient Indian wisdom. He says the same object, we've talked about this a lot here, is perceived in different ways by different minds. Swami was saying that just last Friday. Therefore, the mind must be the other than the object. This is one of the slokas of Patanjali's How to Know God. And another one is, the object cannot be said to be dependent on the perception of a single mind. Think of this. For if this were the case, the object could be said to be non-existent when that single mind was not perceiving it. Therefore, Erwin Schrödinger, a great physicist, also a Vedantist, gets the idea, well, now, this is very interesting. I'm not sure there are multiple consciousnesses. You've got this consciousness looking at the room from different angles. Anyway, in these two aphorisms, Abhedananda says, Patanjali refutes the philosophy, that's what he says, of subjective idealism, that the whole universe is just ideas. The solipsist, the guy that thinks I'm the only one in the room, and Vedanta, a wonderful guy over here in Swamiji's house in South Tanzania, has said from the pulpit, I was there, I heard it. He said, I kind of believe you're all fig Newtons in my own imagination. No, he said, you're all ideas in my mind. Well, in one sense, that's kind of true, because he's not getting at the inner man and inner woman. He's getting at the sense experience he has. But nevertheless, he was wrong when he thought that the father of idealism, you could say a man named Berkeley, they called it Berkeley, in Brooklyn we call it Blakely, in England said that the universe are ideas in God's mind. That's very interesting, because the Indians have the idea that the personal God is the sum of subjective consciousness. So, in these two aphorisms, Patanjali refutes the philosophy of subjective idealism. He admits the reality of an objective world which is independent of our mental perception. Furthermore, he points out that the perceptions of one individual vary from those of another. And we've said that a lot in our days. So the object in itself, according with Kant, cannot be known by sense perception. As we saw at the very beginning, the mind is not the seer, but the instrument of the Atman, which is eternally conscious. The mind is only intermittently conscious of objects, and its perceptions vary according to its own fluctuations. Perceptions of them, the mind is changing all the time, and so is the object of perception. The Atman alone, by remaining unchanged, provides a standard by which all perception can be measured. So, we've gotten pretty close to what the Indian folks call reality. And it's very high, and it's very deep, and it's our own true capital self. And I feel we're all here in a room, like on a boat. And we're traveling at light speed, well, very fast, in a wonderful spaceship toward that consciousness. You do know we're on a spaceship, don't you? It's called planet Earth. It's racing around the sun at 18 miles a second. Lord knows how fast it's going through the universe. Anyway, what a wonderful time we spent with our now beloved uncle, Abhedananda, who spent 20 years with the Yankees. You understand that the third generation is only one generation away from the direct disciples. You've got a superluminary ranked in many men's minds and women's minds as consonant with, for example, Buddha. A few of them have occurred in the history of humanity, superluminaries. So you've got Sri Ramakrishna's 16 disciples, of whom Abhedananda was one. Brahmananda was another. He's picked up there, and Vivekananda, pals in high school. And we had the grace and good fortune to meet the third generation. which was their disciples. And some of us were blessed to sit at their feet. So we're really quite, it says every night we have a prayer speaking about how recent all this, born a child, born a child of our time. Well, you're the fourth generation. Swami Sarvadevananda is a disciple of Brahmananda. Swami Shankara. Thank you, Abhedananda ji. Now you're our uncle. You live in our hearts.
All right, so our next chapter, and he led right into it from the end of the last one.
Oh boy.
Our relation to the Absolute.
There you go. There you go. Now we're ready to fly. We're flying.
A clear understanding of man's relation to the Absolute is a matter of momentous importance to all the students of philosophy and religion, as well as to the seekers after absolute truth. From ancient times, all the philosophers have tried to explain this relation and have arrived at different conclusions. And out of these conclusions, various systems of philosophy and religion have been built up. But when we study the different scriptures of the world, we do not find any mention of the Absolute, which absolutely transcends the limitation of the Nishyans. Rather, we hear and read about the personal God. But is the personal God the same as the Absolute? No. The personal God is attributed with different qualities, which are no other than the products of Nishyans, Maya, or the adjuncts. But the Absolute, with a capital A, or the Absolute Brahman, is devoid of all kinds of qualities, which means the Absolute, or the Brahman indeterminate, is absolutely raised from all kinds of limiting adjuncts, upadhis. The Absolute is like a witness, shakshi, which does neither create nor preserve nor destroy, but remains alone as one without the second. But, for instance, when we read the Christian Bible, there we find God, the Lord of the universe, the Creator, the Governor, and the Ruler. In the Puranas, and in different scriptures, and in other systems of Vedanta, we also find different attributes which have been ascribed to the Absolute, or Brahman. In fact, all attributes are given to God, but he is not called the Absolute according to the non-dualistic Vedanta. Then again, if we study the other scriptures of the world, for instance, the Zend-Avesta of the Persians, or the Quran of the Muslims, we do not find any mention of the real name of the Absolute unless we regard God the Creator as the Absolute. There, I had a copy there for you someplace.
Oh, yeah,
here it is.
you did.
It's under here.
Oh, how lovely. I got so used to hearing your voice, your sweet
Yeah.
voice, I just
No,
got to listen
this
to
one.
all that.
This one.
Oh, this one, all right. But you see, this is Jump Off Joe Creek. There's a place like that, I think, in California, over here somewhere. And we're really into the Absolute now. It's just beautiful. We're in our spaceship.
Next page. Top of the 575.
Wow, we really are in the spaceship. Okay, there are persons again who have no conception of the Absolute with a capital A. In parenthesis, the Absolute Brahman. They do not know about its real essence. They do not believe even in the existence of God with a capital G, or the soul, or the Absolute with a capital A. They think that everything has come through the mechanical process of nature. Or through the process of the finer particles of matter. And so all such questions regarding the relation of the soul to God or the Absolute are merely a waste of time and energy. They would rather live in the world and consider it as a godless world. And get all the comforts from the godless world for the benefit of the soulless body. Oh, this is so well written. Their idea is that everything will end after death, in parenthesis, of the physical body, and so there is no existence of the soul after death. As it is with the physical body or soul, so with the phenomenal universe. They think that there is no such thing as the absolute, and so we cannot think of it. This is fun for me, man, the blackboard. He's cleaning the blackboard. These thinkers are known as the materialists, the agnostics, and the atheists. Swami used to say there's no such thing as an atheist. The atheist says there is no God. The people who have experienced God, like the Swami, and all these generations, they've experienced the reality. They know there is a God, or there is, the supreme reality, spirit, capital S, whatever you want to call it, or not. So the atheist is not telling the truth. The Swami had the greatest regard for the agnostic, because among other things, he and she has the humility to say, I don't know. I haven't experienced it. He actually loved it. He honored the logical positives who were honest. They say, I can't go beyond this because I haven't experienced anything. The other class of thinkers can be divided into three classes. Oh, this is fun. The dualists. Our Father which art in heaven. The qualified non-dualists. I am the vine and you the branches. And the monists or the non-dualists, I and my Father are one. The dualistic believers regard that phase of the absolute, which is the creator, ruler, the governor, all in capital letters, and the personal God. They're thinking of that phase. They consider this creator as the ruler of the universe, or as the personal God, who is all in all. They believe that the personal God creates the universe and human beings out of nothing, and then fashions everything, gives names to everything, and governs everything afterwards.
We can solve the problem here. He says they would rather live in the world and consider it as a godless world. All we have to do is take that L out and consider it a goddess world. You say that's all you have to do.
Well, yeah.
It's the manifest.
In her hands she got the whole wide world. You see, we believe, he may get to it, that God is in the universe, God is the universe, everything. All right, here we go.
But it also reminds me, you were talking earlier, John Dobson said, I'll take existence for granted rather than non-existence. If I have to choose between taking existence for granted or non-existence for granted, it makes a lot more sense to take existence for granted. All right, so he says, they believe that the personal God creates the universe and human beings out of nothing, and then fashions everything, giving names and to everything, and governs everything afterwards. He is outside of us as well as of the universe. He is beyond the nature. He is beyond our reach and also our thought, and we are nothing but his creatures. Some of these believers give human attributes to God and regard him as a human being with attributes infinitely magnified. Others again regard him with a form. They consider that the personal God, the creator, the governor of the universe, has a form like that of a man. We also find this idea is described in Genesis. In the Garden of Eden, says Genesis, the Lord God walked. He had a voice. Adam heard the voice of the Lord, and he hid himself behind the bushes so that the Lord might not see him. Then we find also that the elders of Israel, Korah, Dathan, Abiram, and Abiram, all righty, and 70 of the elders of Israel saw him with a capital H. Moses saw Jehovah's back. Jehovah ate under the oaks at Mamre. This is our dictionary over here.
No, it's just the way the Americans pronounce all
Thank
these
you.
things out of English Bible.
He was pleased with the sweet flavor of sacrifice. Want me to continue?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jehovah had the human qualities, just like any one of us. Only our imperfections are not given to this personal God. He sits on a throne with a right hand and a left hand. He punishes the wicked with the eternal fire. Our relation to such aspects of the absolute is like that of a creature to the Creator, or of a slave to his master. As a slave must be obedient to the master and must perform his duties and obey all the commands of the Lord, so we must obey all the commands of the heavenly Lord. Otherwise he will punish us. That fear of punishment is at the root of all such religions and devotional beliefs and exercises. Why should we live and let others live? They say because that fear of the punishment. Otherwise, we will be punished, just as in a state. If we violate the laws of the state or the commands of the governor, we will be punished.
I'm trying to catch up with you.
Yes.
Yeah. Why don't we get one more, brother?
This relation also exists among the Jews, among the Muslims, and also among the Christians. If you speak about any other relation with the personal God of them, they will not be able to listen to you. They say, we are his slaves, his servants, and his creatures. We can never approach him. We will eventually be separate from him.
Eternally.
We will eternally be separate from him. In the Persian scriptures, we also find that Ahura Mazda is sitting on the throne, and no one can approach him.
This is, I think, just so fascinating. The mystics are going to take a different tack. And the mystics speak with one voice. Many different illustrations, many different stories, but they experience God firsthand. So here's where we go with it.
I didn't realize we're over time.
Are we? Well, let me just give a couple of thoughts about this as we get here. Although we find in Genesis that God created man and woman, you see, God created man after his own image and takes a rib and creates Eve. This is all very amazing. Still, it is very, you realize how long life has been on this planet? It's probably about 2 out of the 4 billion years of the planet's existence, maybe 3. And so, anyway, created God. Well, what we did was we created God in man's image is what we ended up doing. Although we find in Genesis God created man after his own image, still it is very difficult to understand what that image means. Does it mean that our form is the image of the Lord? So now we're going to go on into this, and we're going to discuss all of the 3 different ways with love and reverence that India respects that people think of God. The dualists, the monified, the qualified monists, and the monists, or the absolute. And all of them are relevant. However you experience it is the important thing on your path, and our path together to the top of the mountain, where we realize we're all one, we're all God. Thank you, Swami.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Peace, peace, peace.